Isis Unveiled by Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Chapter 2. Starts with a quote. Pride, where wit fails, steps in to our defense and fills up all the mighty void of sense. By Alexander Pope. And another, but why should the operations of nature be changed? There may be a deeper philosophy than we dream of, a philosophy that discovers the secrets of nature but does not alter, by penetrating them, its course. End quote by Bulwer. Is it enough for man to know that he exists? Is it enough to be formed a human being to enable him to deserve the appellation of man? Is it our decided impression and conviction that to become a genuine spiritual entity, which that designation implies, man must first create himself anew, so to speak? For example, thoroughly eliminate from his mind and spirit not only the dominating influence of selfishness and other impurity, but also the infection of superstition and prejudice. The latter is far different from what we commonly term antipathy or sympathy. We are at first irresistibly or unwittingly drawn within its dark circle by that peculiar influence, that powerful current of magnetism which emanates from ideas as well as from physical bodies. By this we are surrounded and finally prevented through moral cowardice, fear of public opinion, from stepping out of it. It is rare that men regard a thing in either its true or false light, accepting the conclusion by the free action of their own judgment. Quite the reverse. The conclusion is more commonly reached by blindly adopting the opinion current at the hour among those with whom they associate. A church member will not pay an absurdly high price for his pew any more than a materialist will go twice to listen to Mr. Huxley's talk on evolution, because they think that it is right to do so, but merely because Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so have done it, and these personages are the so-and-sos, so therefore we must do what they did. The same holds good with everything else. If psychology had had its Darwin, the descent of man, as regards moral qualities, might have been found inseparably linked with that of his physical form. Society, in its servile condition, suggests to the intelligent observer of its mimicry a kinship between the simia and human beings, even more striking than it's exhibited in the external marks pointed out by the great anthropologist Darwin. The many varieties of the ape, quote, mocking presentments of ourselves, unquote, appear to have been evolved on purpose to supply a certain class of expensively dressed people with the material for genealogical trees. Science is daily and rapidly moving toward the great discoveries in chemistry and physics, organology and anthropology. learned men ought to be free from preconceptions and prejudices of every kind. Yet, although thought and opinion are now free, scientists are still the same men as of old. An utopian dreamer is he who thinks that man ever changes with the evolution and development of new ideas. The soil may be well fertilized and made to yield with every year a greater and better variety of fruit, but dig a little deeper than the stratum required for the crop, and the same earth will be found in the subsoil as was there before the first furrow was turned. Not many years ago, a person who questioned the infallibility of some theological dogma was branded at once an iconoclast and an infidel. Science has conquered, but in its turn the victor claims the same infallibility, though it equally fails to prove it's right. Nevertheless, we feel as if we had some right to question the high priests of science. For many years we have watched the development and growth of that apple of discord, modern spiritualism. Familiar with its literature both in Europe and America, we have closely and eagerly witnessed its interminable controversies and compared its contradictory hypotheses. Many educated men and women, heterodox spiritualists of course, have tried to fathom the protean phenomena. The only result was that they came to the following conclusion: whatever may be the reason of these constant failures, whether such are to be laid at the door of those investigators themselves or to the secret so-called force at work, it is at least proved that, in proportion as the psychological manifestations increase in frequency and variety, the darkness surrounding their origin becomes more and more impenetrable. That phenomena are actually witnessed, mysterious in their nature, generally and perhaps wrongly termed spiritual, it is now idle to deny. Allowing a large discount for clever fraud, what remains is quite serious enough to demand the careful scrutiny of science. The courage of Galileo is not now required to fling it into the face of the scientific academy. Psychological phenomena are already on the offensive. The position assumed by modern scientists is that even though the occurrence of certain mysterious phenomena in the presence of the mediums be a fact, there is no proof that they are not due to some abnormal nervous condition of those individuals. The possibility that they may be produced by returning human spirits need not be considered until the other question is decided. Little exception can be taken to this position. Unquestionably, the burden of proof rests upon those who assert the agency of spirits. If the scientists would grapple with the subject in good faith, showing an earnest desire to solve the perplexing mystery, instead of treating it with undignified and unprofessional contempt, they would be open to no censure. True, the great majority of so-called spiritual communications are calculated to disgust investigators of even moderate intelligence. Even when genuine, they are trivial, commonplace, and often vulgar. During the past 20 years, we have received, through various mediums, messages purporting to be from Shakespeare, Byron, Franklin, Peter the Great, Napoleon and Josephine, and even from Voltaire. The general impression made upon us was that the French conqueror and his consort seemed to have forgotten how to spell words correctly. Shakespeare and Byron had become chronic inebriates, and Voltaire had turned into an imbecile. Who can blame men trained to habits of exactitude, or even simply well-educated people, for hastily concluding that when so much palpable fraud lies upon the surface, there could hardly be truth if they should go to the bottom? The huckstering about of pompous names attached to idiotic communications has given the scientific stomach such an indigestion that it cannot assimilate even the great truth which lies on the telegraphic plateau of this ocean of psychological phenomena. They judge by its surface, covered with froth and scum. But they might, with equal propriety, deny that there is any clear water in the depths of the sea when an oily scum was floating upon the surface. Therefore, if on one hand we cannot very well blame them for stepping back at the first sight of what seems really repulsive, we do, and have a right to censure them for their unwillingness to explore deeper. Neither pearls nor cut diamonds are to be found lying loose upon the ground, and these persons act as unwisely as would a professional diver who should reject an oyster on account of its filthy and slimy appearance, when, by opening it, he might find a precious pearl inside the shell. Even the just and severe rebukes of some of the leading men are of no avail, and the fear on the part of the men of science to investigate such an unpopular subject seems to have now become a general panic. A quote, "The phenomena chase the scientists, and the scientists run away from the phenomena," very pointedly remarks M.A. Aksakoff in an able article on the mediumism and the St. Petersburg scientific community. The attitude of this body of professors towards the subject which they had pledged themselves to investigate was throughout simply disgraceful. Their premature and prearranged report was so evidently partial and inconclusive as to call out a scornful protest even from unbelievers. The inconsistency of the logic of our learned gentlemen against the philosophy of spiritualism proper is admirably pointed out by Professor John Fiske, one of their own body. In a recent philosophical work entitled The Unseen World, while showing that from the very definition of the terms matter and spirit, the existence of spirit cannot be demonstrated to the senses, and that thus no theory is amenable to scientific tests, he deals a severe blow at his colleagues with the following quote, "The testimony in such a case must, under the conditions of the present life, be forever inaccessible. It lies wholly outside the range of experience. However abundant it may be, we cannot expect to meet it, and accordingly, our failure to produce it does not raise even the slightest presumption against our theory. When conceived in this way, the belief in the future life is without scientific support. but at the same time it is placed beyond the need of scientific support and the range of scientific criticism. It is a belief which no imaginable future advance of physical discovery can in any way impugn. It is a belief which is in no sense irrational and which may be logically entertained without in the least affecting our scientific habit of mind or influencing our scientific conclusions. If now, he adds, men of science will not accept the position that spirit is not matter, nor governed by the laws of matter, and refrain from speculations concerning it, restricted by their knowledge of material things, they will withdraw what is to men of religion at present their principal cause of irritation. End quote. But the scientists will do no such thing. They feel incensed at the brave, loyal, and highly commendable surrender of such superior men as Wallace, and refuse to accept even the prudent and restrictive policy of Mr. Crookes. No other claim is advanced for a hearing of the opinions contained in the present work than that they are based upon many years' study of both ancient magic and its modern form, spiritualism. The former, even now, when phenomena of the same nature have become so familiar to all, is commonly set down as clever jugglery. The latter, when overwhelming evidence precludes the possibility of truthfully declaring its charlatanry, is denominated a universal hallucination. Many years of wandering among heathen and Christian magicians, occultists, mesmerizers, and the tutti quanti of white and black art ought to be sufficient, we think, to give us a certain right to feel competent to take a practical view of this doubted and very complicated question. We have associated with the fakirs, the holy men of India, and seen them when in intercourse with the pitris. We have watched the proceedings and modus operandi of the howling and dancing dervishes, held friendly communications with the marabouts of the European and Asiatic Turkey, and the serpent charmers of Damascus and Benares have but few secrets that we have not had the fortune to study. Therefore, when scientists who have never had an opportunity of living among these Oriental jugglers and can judge at the best but superficially, tell us that there is nothing in their performances but mere tricks of prestidigitation, we cannot help feeling a profound regret for such hasty conclusions. That such pretentious claims should be made to a thorough analysis of the powers of nature, and at the same time such unpardonable neglect displayed of questions of purely physiological and psychological character, an astounding phenomenon rejected without either examination or appeal, it is an exhibition of inconsistency, strongly savoring of timidity, if not of moral obliquity. If, therefore, we should ever receive from some contemporaneous Faraday the same fling that the gentleman made years since, when, with more sincerity than good breeding, he said that, quote, "Many dogs have the power of coming to much more logical conclusion than some spiritualists," end quote, we fear we must still persist. Abuse is not an argument, least of all proof. because such men as Huxley and Tyndall denominate spiritualism as, quote, a degrading belief and oriental magic jugglery, end quote, they cannot thereby take from truth its verity. Skepticism, whether it proceeds from a scientific or ignorant brain, is unable to overturn the immorality of our souls, if such immorality is a fact, and plunge them into post-mortem annihilation. Reason is subject to error, says Aristotle. So is opinion, and the personal views of the most learned philosopher are often more liable to be proved erroneous than the plain common sense of his own illiterate servant. In the book called The Tales of the Impious Caliph, Barakias Hassan Oglu, the Arabian sage, holds a wise discourse. Beware, O my sons, of self-incense, he says. It is the most dangerous on account of its agreeable intoxication. Profit by thine own wisdom, but learn to respect the wisdom of thy fathers likewise. And remember, O my beloved, that the light of Allah's truth will often penetrate much easier an empty head than one that is so crammed with learning that many a silver ray is crowded out for want of space, such as is the case with our overwise Qadi. End quote. These representatives of modern science in both hemispheres seem never to have exhibited more scorn or to have felt more bitterly toward the unsolvable mystery than since Mr. Crookes began the investigation of the phenomenon in London. This courageous gentleman was the first to introduce to the public one of those alleged materialized sentries that guards the forbidden gates. Following after him, several other learned members of the scientific body had the rare integrity, combined with a degree of courage, which, in the view of unpopularity of the subject, may be deemed heroic, to take the phenomenon in hand. But alas, although the spirit indeed was willing, the mortal flesh proved weak. Ridicule was more than the majority of them could bear, and so the heaviest burden was thrown upon the shoulders of Mr. Crookes. An account of the benefit this gentleman reaped from his disinterested investigations, and the thanks he received from his own brother scientists, can be found in his 3 pamphlets entitled Researches in the Phenomena of Spiritualism. After a while, the members appointed on the Committee of Dialectical Society and Mr. Crookes, who had applied to his mediums the most crucial tests, were forced by an impatient public to report in so many plain words what they had seen. But what could they say except the truth? Thus they were compelled to acknowledge, first, that the phenomena which they at least had witnessed were genuine and impossible to fake, thus showing that manifestations produced by some unknown force could and did happen. Second, that whether the phenomena were produced by disembodied spirits or other analogous entities, they could not tell, but those manifestations, thoroughly upsetting many preconceived theories as to natural laws, did happen and were undeniable. Several of those manifestations occurred within their own families. Point 3. That, notwithstanding all their combined efforts to the contrary, beyond the indisputable fact of the reality of the phenomena, glimpses of natural action not yet reduced to law, they, to borrow the expression of the Count de Gabelais, could make neither head nor tail of it. Now, this was precisely what a skeptical public had not bargained for. The discomfiture of the believers in spiritualism had been impatiently anticipated before the conclusions of Messrs. Crookes, Varley, and the Dialectical Society were announced. Such a confession on the part of their brother scientists was too humiliating for the pride of even those who had timorously abstained from investigation. It was regarded as really too much that such vulgar and repulsive manifestations of phenomena, which had always, by common consent of educated people, been regarded as nursery tales, fit only to amuse hysterical servant girls and afford revenue to professional somnambulists, that manifestations which had been consigned by the Academy and Institute of Paris to oblivion should so impertinently elude detection at the hands of experts in physical sciences. A tornado of indignation followed the confessional publications. Mr. Crookes depicts it in his next pamphlet on psychic force. He heads it very pointedly with the quotation from Galvani: "I am attacked by two very opposite sects, the scientists and the know-nothings. Yet I know that I have discovered one of the greatest forces of nature." End quote. But then, Mr. Crookes proceeds, "It was taken for granted that the results of my experiments would be in accordance with their preconceptions. What they really desired was not the truth, but an additional witness in favor of their own foregone conclusions. When they found the facts which the investigation established could not be made to fit those opinions, why, so much the worse for the facts. They try to creep out of their own confident recommendations of the inquiry by declaring that Mr. Home is a clever conjurer who has duped us all, or Mr. Crookes might, with equal propriety, examine the performances of an Indian juggler, or Mr. Crookes must get better witnesses before he can be believed, or the thing is too absurd to be treated seriously, or this is impossible and therefore can't be, or the observers have all been biologized and fancy they saw things occur which never took place, etc., etc." End quote. After expending their energy on such puerile theories as unconscious cerebration, or involuntary muscular contraction, and the sublimely ridiculous one of the cracking knee joints, after meeting ignominious failures by the obstinate survival of the new force, and finally, after every desperate effort to compass its obliteration, thought best to give up the whole thing in disgust. Sacrificing their courageously persevering brethren as a holocaust on the altar of public opinion, they withdrew in undignified silence. Leaving the arena of investigation to more fearless champions, these unlucky experimenters are not likely to ever enter it again. It is easier by far to deny the reality of such manifestations from a secure distance than find for them a proper place among the classes of natural phenomena accepted by exact science. And how can they, since all such phenomena pertain to psychology, and the latter, with its occult and mysterious powers, is terra incognita for modern science? Thus, powerless to explain that which proceeds directly from the nature of the human soul itself, the existence of which most of them deny in the first place, unwilling at the same time to confess their ignorance, scientists retaliate very unjustly on those who believe in the evidence of their senses without any pretense to science. "A kick from thee, O Jupiter, is sweet," says the poet Tretyakovsky in an old Russian tragedy. Rude as those Jupiters of science may be occasionally towards us credulous mortals, their vast learning, in less abstruse questions we mean, if not their manners, entitles them to a certain degree of public respect. But unfortunately it is not the gods who shout the loudest. The eloquent Tertullian, speaking of Satan and his imps, whom he accuses of ever mimicking the Creator's works, denominates them as monkeys of God. It is fortunate for the philosophicals that we have no modern Tertullian to consign them to any immortality of contempt, as these monkeys of science. But to return to genuine scientists with a quote from Mr. A. N. Aksakoff, phenomena of a merely objective character force themselves upon the representatives of exact sciences for investigation and explanation. But the high priests of science, in the face of apparently such a simple question, are totally disconcerted. This subject seems to have the privilege of forcing them to betray not only the highest code of their morality, truth, but also the supreme law of science, experiment. They feel that there is something too serious underlying it. The case of Crookes, Hare, De Morgan, Varley, Wallace, and Butleroff create a panic in the scientific communities. They fear that as soon as they concede one step, they will have to yield the whole ground. Time-honored principles, the contemplative speculations of a whole life, of a long line of generations, are all staked on a single card. End quote. In the face of such experience as that of Crookes and the Dialectical Society, of Wallace and the late Professor Hare, what can we expect from our luminaries of erudition? Their attitude toward the undeniable phenomena is in itself another phenomenon. It is simply incomprehensible unless we admit the possibility of another psychological disease as mysterious and contagious as hydrophobia. Although we claim no honor for this new discovery, we nevertheless propose to recognize it under the name of scientific psychophobia. They have ought to learned by this time, in the school of bitter experience, that they can rely on the self-sufficiency of the positive sciences only to a certain point, and that, so long as there remains one single unexplained mystery in nature, the word impossible is far too dangerous for them to utter. In the book Researches on the Phenomena of Spiritualism, Mr. Crookes submits to the option of the reader 8 theories to account for the phenomena observed. These run as follows. First theory: the phenomena are all the result of tricks, clever mechanical arrangements. The mediums are impostors and the rest of the company are fools. Second theory: the persons at a séance are the victims of a sort of mania or delusion and imagine the phenomena to occur which have no real objective existence. Third theory. The whole is the result of conscious or unconscious imagination. The result of the spirit of the medium, perhaps in association with the spirits of some or all of the people present, create the phenomena. Fifth theory. The actions of evil spirits or devils, personifying whom or what they please in order to undermine Christianity and ruin men's souls, this is the theory of our theologians, produce all phenomena. Sixth theory. The actions of a separate order of beings living on this earth but invisible and immaterial to us create the phenomena. They are able, however, occasionally to manifest their presence, known in almost all countries and ages as demons or gnomes or fairies or kobolds or elves or goblins or little people or puck, etc. And this is the claim of some of the Kabbalists. The phenomena are the actions of departed human beings. Eighth theory. The physical force, an adjunct to the fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh theories. The phenomena are some unknown physical force. The first of these theories, having been proved valid only in exceptional, though unfortunately still too frequent cases, must be ruled out as having no material bearing upon the phenomena themselves. Theories on the second and third and the last crumbling entrenchments of the guerrilla of skeptics and materialists, and remain, as lawyers say, ad hoc sub justus lis est. Thus, we can deal in this work but with the four remaining ones, the last, eighth theory being, according to Mr. Crook's opinion, but a necessary adjunct of the others. How subject even a scientific opinion is to error, we may see, if we only compare the several articles on the spiritual phenomena from the able pen of that gentleman, which appeared from 1870 to 1875. In one of the first we read, quote, "The increased employment of scientific methods will promote exact observations and greater love of truths among inquirers, and will produce a race of observers who will drive the worthless residuum of spiritualism hence into the unknown limbo of magic and necromancy." End quote. And in 1875 we read, over his own signature, minute and most interesting descriptions of the materialized spirit, Katie King. It is hardly possible to suppose that Mr. Crooks could be under electrobiological influence or hallucination for 2 or 3 consecutive years. The spirit appeared in his own house, in his library, under the most crucial tests, and was seen, felt, and heard by hundreds of people. But Mr. Crooks denies that he ever took the spirit of Katie King for a disembodied soul. What was it then? If it was not his wife, Mrs. Florence Cook, and his word is our sufficient guarantee that it wasn't, then it was either the spirit of one who had lived on earth, or one of those that come directly under the sixth theory of the 8 of the eminent scientists offered to the public choice. That being, it must have been a fairy or a gnome or an elf, etc. Yes, Katie King must have been a fairy, for to a fairy only could be applied with propriety the following poetic effusion with Mr. Crook's quotes in describing this wonderful spirit. "Round her she made an atmosphere of life. The very air seemed lighter from her eyes. They were so soft and beautiful and rife, with all we can imagine of the skies. Her overpowering presence makes you feel it would not be idolatry to kneel. And thus, after having written in 1870 his severe sentence against spiritualism and magic, after saying that even at the moment he believed, quote, "This whole affair is a superstition, or at least an unexplained trick, a delusion of the senses," end quote, Mr. Crooks, 5 years later in 1975, closes his letter with the following memorable words, quote, "To imagine, I say, the Katie King of the last 3 years to be the result of imposture does more violence to one's reason and common sense than to believe her to be what she herself affirms." This last remark, moreover, conclusively proves that, 1. Notwithstanding Mr. Crook's full convictions that the somebody calling herself Katie King was neither the medium nor some confederate, but on the contrary an unknown force in nature, which, like love, laughs at locksmiths. 2, that hitherto unrecognized form of force, albeit it had become with him not a matter of opinion but absolute knowledge, the eminent investigator still did not abandon to the last his skeptical attitude towards the question. In short, he firmly believes in the phenomenon, but cannot accept the idea of its being the human spirit of somebody departed. It seems to us that, as far as the public prejudice goes, Mr. Crooks solves one mystery by creating a still deeper one. Obscurum per obscuris. In other words, rejecting the worthless residuum of spiritualism, the courageous scientist fairly plunges into his own unknown limbo of magic and necromancy. The recognized laws of physical science account for but a few of the more objective of the so-called spiritual phenomena. While proving the reality of certain visible effects of an unknown force, they have not thus far enabled scientists to control at will even this portion of the phenomenon. The truth is that the professors have not yet discovered the necessary conditions for their occurrence. They must go as deeply into the study of the triple nature of man, physiological, psychological, and divine, as did their predecessors, the magicians and theurgists of old. Until the present moment, even those who have investigated the phenomena as thoroughly and impartially as Mr. Crooks have set aside the cause as something not to be discovered now, if ever. They have troubled themselves no more about that than about the first cause of the cosmic phenomena of the correlation of forces, whose endless effects they are at such pains to observe and classify. Their course has been as unwise as that of man who should attempt to discover the sources of a river by exploring towards its mouth. It has so narrowed their views of the possibilities of natural law that very simple forms of occult phenomena have necessitated their denial that they can occur unless miracles were possible. And this being a scientific absurdity, the result has been that physical science has latterly been losing prestige. If scientists had studied the so-called miracles instead of denying them, many secret laws of nature comprehended by the ancients would have become again discovered. Conviction, says Bacon, comes not through arguments but through experiments. The ancients were always distinguished, especially the Chaldean astrologers and the Magians, for their ardent love and pursuit of knowledge in every branch of science. They tried to penetrate the secrets of nature in the same way as our modern naturalists, and by the only method by which this object can be obtained, namely, by experimental research and reason. If our modern philosophers cannot apprehend the fact that they penetrated deeper than themselves into the mysteries of the universe, this does not constitute a valid reason why the credit of possessing this knowledge should be denied them, or the imputation of superstition laid at their door. Nothing warrants the charge, and every new archaeological discovery militates against their assumptions. As chemists, they were unequaled, and in his famous lecture on the lost arts, Wendell Phillips says, "The chemistry of the most ancient period had reached a point which we have never even approached." End quote. The secret of the malleable glass, which, if supported by one end on its own weight, in 20 hours dwindles down to a fine line that you can curve around your wrist, would be as difficult to rediscover in our civilized countries as to fly to the moon. The fabrication of a cup of glass, which was brought by an exile to Rome in the reign of Tiberius, a cup which he dashed upon the marble pavement, and it was not crushed nor broken by the fall, and which, as it got dented some, was easily brought back into perfect shape again with a hammer, is a historic fact. If it is doubted now, it is merely because these moderns cannot do the same. And yet, in Samarkand and some monasteries of Tibet, such cups and glassware may be found to this day. Nay, there are persons who claim that they can make the same by virtue of their knowledge of the much ridiculed and ever doubted alchemy. This agent that Paracelsus and Van Helmont maintained to be a certain fluid in nature, the universal solvent, capable of reducing all sublunary bodies as well as homogeneous and mixed into their ens premium, or the original matter of which they are composed, or into a uniform, equable, and potable liquid that will unite with water and the juices of all bodies, and yet retain its own radical virtues, and, if again mixed with itself, will thereby be converted into purely elementary water. What impossibilities prevent our crediting that statement? Why should it not exist, and why the idea be considered utopian fantasy? Is it again because our modern chemists are unable to produce it? But surely it may be conceived without any great effort of imagination that all bodies must have originally come from some first matter, and that this matter, according to the lessons of astronomy, geology, and physics, must have been a fluid. Why should not gold, of whose genesis our scientists know so little, have been originally a primitive or basic matter of gold, a ponderous fluid which, as Van Helmont says, quote, "from its own nature, or a strong cohesion between its particles, acquired afterward a solid form." End quote. There seems to be very little absurdity to believe in a universal fluid that resolves all bodies into their original material. Van Helmont calls it the highest and most successful of all salts, which, having obtained the supreme degree of simplicity, purity, subtlety, enjoys alone the faculty of remaining unchanged and unimpaired by the subjects it works upon, and of dissolving the most stubborn and untractable bodies, as stones, gems, glass, earth, sulfur, metals, etc., into red salt, equal in weight to the matter dissolved, and this with as much ease as hot water melts down snow. End quote. It is into this fluid that the makers of malleable glass claimed, and now claim, that they immersed common glass for several hours to acquire the property of malleability. We have a ready and palpable proof of such possibilities. A foreign correspondent of the Theosophical Society, a well-known medical practitioner, and one who has studied the occult sciences for upward of 30 years, has succeeded in obtaining what he terms the true oil of gold, i.e. the primary element. Chemists and physicists have seen it and examined it, and were driven to confess that they neither knew how it was obtained, nor could they do the same. That he desires his name to remain unknown is not to be wondered at. Ridicule and public prejudice are more dangerous sometimes than in the Inquisition age of old. This Adamic earth is next-door neighbor to the Alcahest, and one of the most important secrets of the alchemists. No Kabbalist will reveal it to the world, for, as he expresses it in the well-known jargon, it would explain the eagles of the alchemists and how the eagle's wings are clipped, says a secret from Thomas Vaughan, 20 years prior. As the dawn of physical science broke into a glaring daylight, the spiritual sciences merged deeper and deeper into night, and in their turn, they were denied. So now these great masters in psychology are looked upon as ignorant and superstitious ancestors, as mountebanks and jugglers, because, forsooth, the sun of modern learning shines today so bright. It has become an axiom that the philosophers and men of science of the olden time knew nothing and lived in a night of superstition. But their traducers forget that the sun of today will seem dark by comparison with the luminary of tomorrow, whether justly or not. And as the men of our century think their ancestors ignorant, so will perhaps their descendants count them for know-nothings. The world moves in cycles. The coming human race will be but the reproductions of races long bygone, as we, perhaps, are the images of those who lived 100 centuries ago. The time will come when those who now in public slander the Hermetists, but ponder in secret their dust-covered volumes, who plagiarize their ideas, assimilate and give them as their own, they will receive their dues. A quote from Pfaff: What man has ever taken more comprehensive views of nature than Paracelsus? He was the bold creator of chemical medicines, the founder of courageous parties, victorious in controversy, belonging to those spirits who have created amongst us a new mode of thinking on the natural existence of things. What he scattered through his writings on the philosopher's stone, on pygmies and spirits of the mines, on signs, on homunculi and the elixir of life, and which are employed by many to lower his estimation, cannot extinguish our grateful remembrance of his general works, nor our admiration of his free, bold exertions and his noble intellectual life." End quote. More than one pathologist, chemist, homeopathist, and magnetist has quenched his thirst for knowledge than in the books of Paracelsus. Frederick Hufeland got his theoretical doctrines on infection from this medieval quack, as Sprengel delights in calling one who is immeasurably higher than himself. Mr. Hemmen, who endeavors to vindicate this great philosopher and nobly tries to redress his slandered memory, speaks of him as the greatest chemist of all time. So do Professor Molitor and Dr. Ennermoser, the eminent German psychologist. According to their criticisms on the labors of this hermetist, Paracelsus is the most wondrous intellect of his age and a noble genius. But our modern lights assume to know better, and the ideas of the Rosicrucians about the elementary spirits, the goblins and the elves, have sunk into the limbo of magic and fairy tales for early childhoods. We are quite ready to concede to skeptics that one half and even more of seeming phenomenon are but more or less clever fraud. Recent exposures, especially of materializing mediums, but too well prove the fact. Unquestionably, numerous others are still in store, and this will continue until tests have become so perfect and spiritualists so reasonable and reliable as no longer to furnish opportunity to mediums or weapons to adversaries. What should sensible spiritualists think of the character of angel guides, who, after monopolizing perhaps for years a poor medium's time, health, and means, suddenly abandon him when he most needs their help? None but creatures without soul or conscience would be guilty of such injustice, surely. Conditions? Mere sophistry. What sort of spirits must they be who would not summon, if necessary, an army of their spirit friends, if such a thing there be, to snatch the innocent medium from the pit dug for his feet? Such things happened in olden time, such may happen now. There were apparitions before modern spiritualism and phenomena like ours in every previous age. If modern manifestations are a reality and palpable facts, so must have been the so-called miracles and exploits of old. Or if the latter are but fictions of superstition, so must be the former, for they rest on no better testimony. But in this daily increasing torrent of occult phenomena that rushes from one end of the globe to the other, though 2/3 of the manifestations are proved spurious, what of those which are proved genuine beyond doubt? Among these may be found communications coming through non-professional as well as professional channelers, which are sublime and divinely grand. Often through young children and simple-minded persons, we receive philosophical teachings and precepts, poetry and inspirational orations, music, and paintings that are fully worthy of the reputations of their alleged authors. Their prophecies are often verified, and their moral disquisitions beneficent, though the latter is of rarer occurrence. Who are those spirits? What those powers or intelligences which are evidently outside of the medium proper and entities per se? These intelligences deserve the appellation, and they differ as widely from the generality of spooks and goblins that hover around the cabinets for physical manifestations as day from night. We must confess that the situation appears to be very grave. The control of mediums by such unprincipled and lying spirits is constantly becoming more and more general, and the pernicious effects of seeming diabolism constantly multiply. Some of the best mediums and channelers are abandoning the public rostrum and retiring from this influence, and the movement is drifting churchward. We offer you the prediction that unless spiritualists set about the study of ancient philosophy, so as to learn to discriminate between spirits and to guard themselves against the baser sort, 25 years from now will not elapse before they will have to fly to the Ramesh communion to escape these guides and controls that they have fondled for so long. The signs of this catastrophe already exhibit themselves. At a recent convention at Philadelphia, it was seriously proposed to organize a sect of Christian spiritualists. This is because, having withdrawn from the church and learned nothing of the philosophy of the phenomena or the nature of their spirits, they are drifting about on a sea of uncertainty like a ship without compass or rudder. They cannot escape the dilemma. While men of genuine science, such as Wallace, Crookes, Wagner, Butleroff, Varley, Buchanan, Hare, Reichenbach, Thury, Petrie, De Morgan, Hoffman, Goldschmidt, W. Gregory, Flammarion, Sergeant Cox, and many others, firmly believe in the current phenomena, many of the above named reject the theory of departed spirits. Therefore, it seems but logical to think that if the London Katie King, the only materialized something which the public is obliged more or less to credit out of respect to science, is not the soul of an ex-mortal, then it must be the astral, solidified shadow of either one of the Rosicrucian spooks, a fantasy of superstition, or of some as of yet unexplained force in nature. Be it, however, a spirit of health or goblin damned, it is of little consequence, for if it be once proved that its organism is not solid matter, then it must be and is a spirit, an apparition. It is an intelligence which acts outside our organism, and therefore must belong to some existing, even though unseen, race of beings. But what is Katie King? What is this something which thinks and even speaks, but yet is not human? That is impalpable and yet not a disembodied spirit? That stimulates affection, passion, remorse, fear, joy, but yet which feels neither? What is this creature which rejoices in cheating the truthful inquirer and mocking at sacred human feeling? For, if not Mr. Crookes's Katy King, other similar creatures have done all of these. Who can fathom the mystery? The true psychologist alone. And where should he go for his textbooks but to the neglected alcoves of libraries where the works of despised hermetics and theurgists have been gathering dust these many years? Says Henry Moore, the revered English Platonist, in his answer to an attack on the believers of spiritual and magic phenomenon by a skeptic of that age named Webster, as for that other opinion that the greater part of the reformed divines hold, that it was the devil that appeared in Samuel's shape, it is beneath contempt. For, though I do not doubt but that in many of these necromantic apparitions they are ludicrous spirits, not the souls of the deceased that appear, yet I am clear for the appearing of the soul of Samuel, and as clear that in other necromancies it may be such kinds of spirits, such as Porphyrius above describes, that change themselves into omniferous shapes and forms, and while one acts the parts of demons, and another while acting as an angel, and another as the souls of the departed. And I confess such a spirit as this might personate Samuel here, for anything Webster alleged to the contrary, for his arguments indeed are wonderfully weak and wooden. End quote. When such a metaphysician and philosopher as Henry Moore gives his testimony as this, we may well assume our point to have been well taken. Learned investigators, all very skeptical as to spirits in general and departed human spirits in particular, during the last 20 years, have taxed their brains to invent new names for an old phenomenon. Thus, with Mr. Crookes and Sergeant Cox, it is called the psychic force. Professor Thury of Geneva calls it the psychode, or actinic force. Professor Balfour Stewart calls it the electrobiological power. Faraday, who has been called the great master of experimental philosophy in physics, but who is apparently a novice in psychology, superciliously termed these spirits an unconscious muscular action, or an unconscious cerebration. Sir William Hamilton calls the spirit a latent thought. Dr. Carpenter labels it the idiomotor principle, etc., etc., etc. So many scientists, so many made-up names. Years ago, the old German philosopher Schopenhauer disposed of this force and matter at the same time. And since the conversion of Mr. Wallace, the great anthropologist has evidently adopted his ideas. Schopenhauer's doctrine is that the universe is but the manifestation of the will. Every force in nature is also an effect of will, representing a higher or lower degree of its objectiveness. It is the teaching of Plato who stated distinctly that everything visible was created or evolved out of the invisible and eternal will, and after its fashion. Our heaven, Plato says, was produced according to the eternal pattern of the ideal world. and contained, as everything else, the geometrical shape of the dodecahedron, which was used by the Creator deity. With Plato, the primal being is an emanation of the demiurgic mind, the nous, which contains from the eternity the idea of the to-be-created world within itself, and which idea the demiurge produces out of himself. The laws of nature are the established relations of this idea to the forms of its manifestations. Schopenhauer says these forms are space, time, and causality. Through time and space, the idea varies in its numberless manifestations. These ideas are far from being new, and even with Plato they were not original. This is what we read in the Chaldean oracles. The works of nature coexist with the intelligent spirit light of the Father, for it is the soul, the spirit, which adorned the great heavens, and which adorns it after the Father. The incorporeal world then was already completed, having its seat in the divine reason, says Philo, who is erroneously accused of deriving his philosophy from Plato's. In the theogony of Mochus, we find ether first, and then the air, the two principles from which the intelligible God, the visible universe of matter, is born. In the Orphic hymns, the eros phanes evolves from the spiritual egg, which the ethereal winds impregnate, wind being a synonym for the Spirit of God, who is said to move in ether, brooding over the chaos, the divine idea of potentiality. In the Hindu Upanishad, Purusha, the divine spirit, already stands before the original matter, from whose union springs the great soul of the world. Maha equals Atma, Brahm, the spirit of life. These later appellations are identical with the universal soul, or anima mundi, and the astral light of the theurgists and Kabbalists. Pythagoras brought his doctrines from the Eastern sanctuaries, and Plato compiled them into a form more intelligible than the mysterious numerals of the original sage, whose doctrines he had fully embraced, to the uninitiated mind. Thus, the cosmos is the sun, with Plato having for his father and mother the divine thought and matter. The Egyptians, says Dunlap, distinguished between an older and younger Horus, the former the brother of Osiris, and the latter the son of Osiris and Isis. The first is the idea of the world remaining in the demiurgic mind, born in the darkness before the creation of the world. The second Horus is the idea going forth from the Logos, becoming clothed with matter and assuming an actual physical existence. End quote. The Chaldean oracles tell us, quote, the mundane God, eternal, boundless, young and old, of winding form. This winding form is a figure to express the vibratory motion of the astral light, with which the ancient priests were perfectly well acquainted, though they may have differed in views of ether with modern scientists. For in the ether they placed the eternal idea pervading the universe, or the will which becomes force and creates or organizes matter. Van Helmont says, the will is the first of all powers, for through the will of the Creator all things were made and put into motion. The will is the property of all spiritual beings and displays itself in them the more actively, the more they are freed from matter. And Paracelsus, the divine as he was called, adds in the same strain, faith must confirm the imagination, for faith establishes the will. Determined will is a beginning of all magical operations. Because men do not perfectly imagine and believe, the result is that the arts are uncertain, while they might be perfectly certain. The opposing power alone of unbelief and skepticism, if projected in a current of equal force, can block the other and sometimes completely neutralize it. Why should spiritualists wonder that the presence of some strong skeptics, or of those who, feeling bitterly opposed to the phenomenon, unconsciously exercise their willpower in opposition, hinders and often stops altogether the manifestations? If there is no conscious power on earth, but sometimes finds another to interfere with or even counterbalance it, why wonder when the unconscious, passive power of a medium or channeler is suddenly paralyzed in its effects by the other opposing one, though it is also be as unconsciously exercised? Professors Faraday and Tyndall boasted that their presence at a circle would stop at once every manifestation. This fact alone ought to have proved to the eminent scientists that there was some force in these phenomena worthy to arrest their attention. As a scientist, Professor Tyndall was perhaps preeminent in the circle of those who were present at the seance. As a shrewd observer, one not easily deceived by a tricking medium, he was perhaps no better, if as clever, as others in the room. And if the manifestations were but the fraud so ingenious as to deceive the others, they would not have stopped even on his account. What medium can ever boast of such phenomenon as were produced by Yeshua and the Apostle Paul after him? Yet even Yeshua met with cases where the unconscious force of resistance overpowered even his so well-directed current of will. Quote, and he did not many mighty works there because of their unbelief. End quote. There is a reflection of every one of these views in Schopenhauer's philosophy. Our investigating scientists might consult his works with profit. They will find therein many a strange hypothesis founded on old ideas, speculations on the new phenomena, which may prove as reasonable as any, and be saved the useless trouble of inventing new theories. The psychic and ectenic forces, the ideomotor and the electrobiological powers, the latent thought and even unconscious cerebration theories can be condensed into two words: the Kabbalistic astral light. The bold theories and opinions expressed in Schopenhauer's works differ widely with those of the majority of our orthodox scientists. In reality, remarks Schopenhauer, there is neither matter nor spirit. The tendency to gravitation in a stone is as unexplainable as thought in the human brain. If matter can, no one knows why, fall to the ground, then it can also, no one knows why, think. And so, even in mechanics, as we trespass beyond the purely mathematical, as soon as we reach the inscrutable adhesion, gravitation, and so on, we are faced by phenomena which are to our senses as mysterious as the will and thought in man. We must find ourselves facing the incomprehensible, for such is every force in nature. Where is then that matter which you all pretend to know so well, and from which, being so familiar with it, you draw all your conclusions and explanations and attribute it to all things? That which can be fully realized by our reason and senses is but the superficial. They can never reach the true inner substance of things. Such was the opinion of Kant. If you consider that there is in a human head some sort of a spirit, then you are obliged to concede the same thing to a stone. If your dead and utterly passive matter can manifest a tendency toward gravitation, or, like electricity, attract and repel and send out sparks, then, as well as the brain, it must also be able to think. In short, every particle of the so-called spirit we can replace with an equivalent of matter, and every particle of matter replace with spirit. Thus, it is not the Cartesian division of all things into matter and spirit that can ever be found philosophically exact, but only if we divide them into will and manifestation, which form of division has naught to do with the former, for it spiritualizes everything. All that which is in the first instance real and objective, body and matter, it transforms into a representation, and every manifestation into will. End quote. These views corroborate what we have expressed about the various names given to the same thing. The disputants are battling about mere words. Call the phenomena force, energy, electricity, or magnetism, will, or spirit power. It will ever be the partial manifestation of the soul, whether disembodied or imprisoned for a while in its body, of a portion of that intelligent, omnipotent and individual will, pervading all nature, and known through the insufficiency of human language to express correctly psychological images as God.